everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Bright Side of Life. I am your host, Melissa Bright, and today we have Nick Hutchison on, and he is the author of the new and upcoming book, Rise of the Reader: Strategies for Marketing Your Reading Habits and Implying What You Learn. This is going to be launching November 1st, so in 1 month. Nick is also the founder of Book Thinkers, which is a digital marketing agency for driven authors. So without further ado, Nick, welcome to The Bright Side of Life. How are you doing today?
I am doing very well. I'm curious, what is your favorite book of all time?
Oh, he's already turning the interview back to me. Favorite book of all time. I would probably say so far, The Power of the Subconscious Mind by,
Nice.
I forgot his name now. It's right here, but whatever that guy's name is. That book I listened to audio form, and then I literally bought the book later because I'm like, I'm just going to keep rereading this for reminders.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, that happens in my reading world sometimes too. I'll listen to something and then I'll be like, that was amazing. I definitely have to get the physical book.
Yeah, and I'm excited to ask you all those questions about like audio versus like the hardback, all that stuff. And just for my listeners, he interviews some incredible people. So I'm just going to name drop a couple of them. Grant Cardone, Alex Hormozy, Lewis Howes, Evan Carmichael. The list goes on and on and on and on. But he interviews these people from the amazing books that he has read and they have written. And it's just awesome. Your social media is so great. And you learn so much just from your social media that you're like, I want to go read this book. I need to go read this book. This is what I need in my life.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And I am always grateful when somebody like you brings up those names, because if you would have told me a few years ago that I'd be interviewing those people, I would have said no way. But that's the power of intention. I spoke it into existence and it has become reality. So yeah, I always pinch myself. I'm living the life that I wanted to.
Yeah. And I love that. And I can say the same for myself with certain guests I've had on my podcast, like Ken Honda, Kristen Butler, as you know, like I never knew 3 years ago that this is what I would be doing. And I'm like, okay, this is pretty cool. So we share that.
Yeah, it's fun. Kristen's amazing. She
She
really is.
is. She is such a sweetheart. Her like calming presence is just like I could like take a nap listening to her talk because she's so like sweet. All right. Why don't we start by how you became interested in reading? If you're watching on YouTube, you will see literally probably 1,000 books behind Nick right now. Have you read all of them?
I've read everything from, okay, so this shelf up, with the exception of a couple book sets. So yeah, you know what? I'll give the backstory. So when I was growing up, it might surprise anybody that's watching on YouTube or anybody that's listening to us talk about the 1,000 books behind me that I was not much of a reader. In fact, I was more of the athlete stereotype growing up, not much of the reader. You couldn't pay me to read a book. I was a little bit rebellious in school. And so that behavior continued really up until my senior year of college. So going into my senior year, I took an internship at a local software company. It was a sales internship, and I had about a 1 hour commute each way. And so my boss at the time, Kyle, introduced me to the world of personal development podcasting first. So shows
Mm.
just like this, where a host would interview a series of guests, and those guests would talk about what they did to become successful. And I had about an hour commute each way. So I was driving for 10 hours a week. I was listening to 10 hours of podcasting a week. And what's funny is so many of those people that were being interviewed, they gave at least some credit for their success to the books that they were reading. And so
Mm.
here I was, this like cocky 20, 21-year-old guy. I thought I knew everything. You can't teach me anything new. But each and every time one of these books got brought up, I realized that if I deliberately chose not to read them, then I was deliberately choosing to live under my potential. And
Mm.
I was a go-getter at the time, right? I cared all about financial success. So I'm like, let me go see what these books have to offer. And right from day one, my mind was blown, and I have not looked back since. I've read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these books and tried to apply something from all of them.
which is what I'm so excited to talk to you about because your book is literally reading habits. Because, and I guess we can just dive into this right now. I have this is my mindset in terms of reading books or listening to books. If I know that I am going to be learning a lot from a book, I just want hard the hard physical copy so I can mark it up, do my notes, highlight whatever it is I need to do. If it's more of a story, audio is fine, but I want the physical copy because of one of the things I'm sure that you talk about in your book is the retention. I just read The Inner Work. It's called The Inner Work, but it's a book. So it sounds like I'm saying workbook, but I'm not. Okay. I might remember like 10 things. If you were like, Melissa, go list 10 things that you just remembered from there. But there's like 280 pages. So I forgot a lot. So I want to ask you, how can we actually retain all of this information so it's not just a waste of damn time that I just read that entire book?
Yeah, some great questions in there that we can unpack. So number one, you mentioned audio versus physical paper books.
Yeah.
So I'm just like you. I read most of the books that I consume. I will listen to long biographies, autobiographies, storytelling type books, or books that are longer than 500 pages, just because they're easier to listen to. But you have to understand, if you're choosing just to listen to a book, that you're not going to get as much out of it, because around 80% of the inputs to our brain are visual. And so by default, if you are just listening to information, you're only, I mean, you're kind of sacrificing some retention opportunity, because all of the other senses make up that 20%.
Okay.
So that's by default. And oftentimes what happens when people are reading a physical paper book is they are monotasking,
Mm,
focused on one activity at a time, which is great for retention. If you're listening to a book, a lot of times people, or this podcast, you're listening in the car, you're
yeah.
listening while doing chores at the gym. And so you're not focused on the activity. So right from the get-go, I think it's just like you're saying, if you're looking to implement something, the chances that you do that through a physical paper book are a lot higher.
Yeah.
So as far as retention goes, I had a realization a couple of years ago that I at the time my goals were around reading a certain number of books per year. But I
Yeah.
realized that that's not the goal, right? That's a vanity metric.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that won't change my life. What I'm actually optimizing for is implementation and retention. So that's when I really started to shift from, oh, I want to read 52 books a year or 104 books a year to a week, to, hey, I'd like to change my life. And that's quantified in a different way.
Mm,
So one of the places that I like to start when I'm thinking about retention is in the beginning of our reading process. So
okay.
I love to set an intention for each book that I read. It's a really important part of what I do and what I teach. It's
Okay.
kind of like a goal for each book that you read. So I'll give this example and then I'll kind of pause because it's a little bit of a longer example. But there's a book that a lot of business owners are reading right now called $100 Million Leads by Alex Hormozy.
Yep.
And I love Alex. Like you mentioned in the intro, he's been on our podcast. We've interacted with him quite a bit. His first business book, $100 Million Lead Offers. Sorry,
Yeah.
uh, I have a great success story about that I can tell in a minute. But okay, so back to this book, $100 Million Leads. A lot of people are just reading it aimlessly, hoping that it's going to change their life. What I like to do is set a goal that follows the SMART goal framework. So something that is specific, measurable, attainable, meaning realistic,
Right.
relevant, meaning I'm emotionally connected to the outcome, and time bound. So instead of just reading $100 Million Leads and hoping that I'll implement a bunch of stuff, I'll set a goal. Something like find and implement at least 2 lead generation strategies for my business book thinkers by the end of October. So
Okay.
now I'm going to write that goal on the inside cover of the book, the physical paper book, and review it each and every time I read another chapter or a few more pages, so that my brain can filter for those 2 lead generation actions that I'm going to take. Because again, I'm not optimizing for finishing the book, I'm optimizing for implementation and retention. And so starting by defining a goal like that, that's, I think, where the magic happens. And just to kind of tie this off with a pretty bow, maybe when I finish the book, I have found 15 or 20 different strategies, but
Mhm.
they're not all created equal, right? 20% of them will probably lead to 80% of the change that you're looking to make. Those
Yeah.
are the highest leveraged activities that you could implement. And so that's all I choose to implement. That's all I choose to retain as well. Because again, not every takeaway from a book is created equal. Maybe there's a little stat that excites you or something like that, but it's not really relevant to like changing your life. So I choose not to try to retain those things anymore. And I only try to retain the most important information in each book.
You just blew my mind. Like literally, this is such a great approach. Now, something I want to ask you, and I know kind of like your title of your book, Rise of the Reader, and then you have what you're going to learn about. You're going to learn about strategies for mastering your reading habits, blah blah blah. So, do you kind of use that as your goal for the book, because sometimes the titles might not say like, well, what am I actually going to get out of this? How do you go about that?
Yeah, so having read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books, when I decided to write my own book, I thought, what are the things that I enjoy the most about my favorite books? So we
Okay.
could take the 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss as an example.
Okay.
The 4 Hour Work Week, that is the goal, right? And in his subtitle, it says something like escape 9 to 5 and design your dream life. It's like that is the goal of the book. And so, yeah, strategies for mastering your reading habits and applying what you learn. That is the goal of the book. I want to teach people how to get more from the other books they're reading. So you create a promise and you create a little bit of almost like a little bit of curiosity, like, well, what
Yeah.
are these strategies that
Yeah.
will change my life? And right in the beginning of my book, I have the reader define their goal for the book they're reading, which I think is a little unique. So I encourage
Yeah.
people to write it right on the inside cover of my book.
Okay. I saw it was either on your personal social media or on Book Thinkers. I saw something, and I think it was for Alex's book. It was in red writing, and it was your intention. And now that makes sense of why you do that.
Yeah, and so our brains have this filtering mechanism called the RAS, the reticular activating system.
Okay.
And it essentially acts as our filter. So a popular example might be if I say yellow car, like you can't remember the last yellow car that you saw, but when you walk outside, you're probably going to see one.
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
like you conjured it out of nowhere, but it's that you're filtering for it for the first time because our
Mm.
brains receive so many inputs and we have to decide where to focus our attention. And so if you tell your brain, I'm looking to find and implement at least 2 lead generation strategies for my business book thinkers by the end of October, and you tell your brain that's exactly what you're looking for. It's like sharing your goal for the book with the book so that it
Yeah.
can share only a specific finite amount of information back with you that you can then use to implement. So again, this is one of those strategies that when I first started, nobody told me about. And I want people to read with more intention because sometimes I'll meet somebody and I'll be like, Melissa, what are you reading? And you'll tell me, and then I'll be like, why? And you're like, well, I don't know why. Well, why are you reading the books you're reading? What's the goal for the book? What is it going to help you do? Is it solving a problem? Is it developing a skill set? What is it? Like,
Yeah.
share it with me, you know?
Oh, that's good. I think back to I have a lot of books on Audible. The Body Keeps the Score because it's like 800 pages and I'm like I cannot. I've tried to read it and it's very long. But James Clear's Atomic Habits, I should have got the damn physical copy. Like every time I'm listening to it, I'm just like my notes are like so filled. I'm like, I'm going to rewrite the book because I've just jotted down so many damn notes. Just buy the hard copy. But with that, I am very much the same as you in terms of I'll listen to podcasts, but like a book, I won't listen to it unless I'm literally like maybe folding laundry where I know my mind can only be listening to like what the author is saying because I only have so much time and I want to learn something. I want to learn how to create better habits and everything that he teaches. So I
Oh,
am
I
very
get it. It's like, oh, sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine. I just like I know how I try to be intentional at least with that. Like, I'm not going to go and be distracted and listen to the thing. If I want to learn that, I need to make intentions about that.
Yeah, it's so same thing for me, right? Listening to the same playlist, like a music playlist for the 10,000th time, it's not going to get you closer to where you want to be in life.
Right.
So although a podcast or an audiobook is not as efficient as reading a physical paper book, I still think it's better than just music or something. And I'm not a
Yeah.
robot. I still listen to music and watch Netflix and everything, but
Right.
I do want to make it a point that a physical paper book is kind of the holy grail. Or check this out, reading the physical paper book while listening to the audio at the same time. It's like a multi-sensory experience, and you can get even higher than that 80% input.
Yeah. I don't know where I just heard somebody say that from. And I was like, oh my God. I don't know who it was that said that. Now I can't remember. Do you know I just had James on last week, James Bracken?
Oh no, I didn't. That's funny. Yeah, James is great.
Yeah, I'm like, "Oh my god, this is so funny that you guys are both week to week." They work together, by the way, at Book Thinkers, so that's why I asked him that. Um, I wanna ask you, for the books that you are reading now in terms of well, first of all, I wanna back up. How old are you?
29 years young, but if you
One
include all of the books behind me, thousands of years old.
I love that. I love that. Okay. I just wanted to know where you were on your journey of senior year in college. I'm like, was that 3 years ago? Was that 9 years ago? Okay.
Yeah,
S
so let's see. That was 2015 going into 16, maybe? No, 20 mid 2015. So
Okay.
a little bit less than 10 years ago.
Okay. So then when did you start your marketing agency of book thinkers? Because this is awesome.
About a year later. So I was
Okay.
reading all of these books and I knew I wanted to start a business when I graduated college and I didn't know what it was going to be about, but I was receiving so many of the same questions about these books because I was applying them. I was getting rid of my ego. I was getting rid of a lot of insecurities and fears that I had at the time. So I was changing, and people were like, "What the heck is Nick Hutchison doing? Like he's a totally different guy now." And so I would recommend the same books all the time, but it became so repetitive that I thought there needs to be a place where I document all of the books I'm reading so that I could just send other people to this Instagram, for instance.
Yeah.
And so although the original idea for Book Thinkers was a little bit different, we wanted to create a mobile application that readers could use to retain and implement more from books, which didn't happen. And I can talk about that failure because we really did fail. Recent college graduate spending tens of thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours of his time uh, not to be successful is quite the story. But as I started sharing books on social media, the audience just started to grow. And it
Okay.
grew organically and it grew randomly. And I wasn't really sure what was happening, but I loved it. And
Yeah.
eventually, authors started to reach out and they'd say, "Hey, Nick, my target reader for this book looks a heck of a lot like your audience on social media. I love your book reviews. Can I pay you to review one of my books?" And I was like, "Well, that's pretty cool." I hadn't thought about it that way up until then. So
Right.
now I was getting paid to read. And again, the only reason we built this audience was in anticipation of releasing a mobile app, and so we wanted to sell it to an existing community,
Wow.
but I never really saw the book review thing when I was first starting out. So nowadays we have 10 people on the team, including James, and we work with hundreds of authors a year, but I never could have imagined that.
Wow. That is so cool. I just love hearing people's stories like you were trying to do this one thing and this is actually what happened and then somebody came and intersected and you're like light bulb moment. So you said why don't we talk a little bit about your failures because as we don't even want to say failures I'm sure it was a huge learning moment. So talk about that story and what your app was supposed to be and why it was not.
Yeah, well, when I was early in college, I ran my own house painting business. So I hired a bunch of my friends, I went door to door, we sold jobs and stuff, but it was part of a school program where you could learn how to run your own business. And I had another friend at school that ran his own house painting business. And so we were both entrepreneurial. We both wanted to start businesses. We didn't exactly know what that would look like. And so when I was a senior in college and I had just started reading these books, I would meet with him. His name's Alec. I would meet with him on a weekly basis, on the college campus in one of those rooms with the whiteboards and the markers and everything.
Yep.
And we would just sketch out business ideas. And so that's that's like how it started for me. And
Okay.
I I wanted to solve that same problem that we've already been talking about a little bit as far as retention. So
Okay.
I wanted a place where basically a Goodreads, which is a platform where you could categorize all the books that you're reading, but I wanted to include all of the notes. And then I wanted it to systematically remind you of those notes so that you could get a push notification, reread these takeaways, and increase the chances that you could retain them. Again, long story short, it never happened that way. But that's why book thinkers started. And
Mm,
although we spent tons of money and tons of time, just like you're talking about, I mean, every obstacle presents an opportunity. And I wouldn't have the business that I have today without having gone through that experience.
yeah.
What I do think is unique, maybe about my journey, is that I did have a full-time job. So I went full-time with that software company once I graduated college, and
Okay.
I kept that job for years. In fact, I kept it past the point that I had already hired a few people at Book Thinkers, and we were already doing six figures in revenue, but I still
Right.
had the job because I just wanted to minimize risk. Like I knew
Yeah.
that 95% of small businesses failed in the first 5 years. And I
Hmm.
didn't want to be one of those businesses that ran out of money and got all bummed out and gave up and never started a business again. Like I knew I wanted to be in the world of entrepreneurship. I just had to kind of hedge my risk by working a full-time job at the same time.
Mm, yeah. And that makes sense though. You definitely just wanted to make sure that all your bases were covered. But I think that's a great story now looking back on it. I'm sure it was, you know, losing a lot of money and stuff is hard at the time, and yeah. But I think at these days, just with personal development, because I know I sure have lots of failures, but now I can look at them in a different way and not be so angry about it.
Growing up in the United States, at least this was my experience, is that in the public education system, you're taught that failure is a bad thing. You're taught
Yep.
to avoid failing tests and presentations, and you're sort of forced to think like your teachers. You're graded poorly if you don't agree with them on things. And so because of that experience, I try to avoid failure
Mm,
for a little while, and I recognize that at 29 and now my business is succeeding and stuff, that it does seem like this happened early for me. But uh, again, it took me a long time, at least relative to my own life, to figure out that through failure, you will learn and you can iterate, you'll collect feedback. It's part of the process. It's not negative in any way, shape, or form. It just
mm-mm.
is, it's neutral. It's part of in fact, it's positive because it
Yeah.
teaches you how to get closer to where you want to be. So I just, I think it's a bummer that we're taught to avoid failure and avoid criticism and stuff when we're younger, because that's where all the magic happens.
Yeah. I agree. And I would say I would probably have that same approach. Like when I started asking myself, why am I such a perfectionist? Why am I procrastinating? Well, they went hand in hand. I procrastinated because I was a perfectionist. And if this didn't turn out right and if it failed, well, then I must be a failure. Like, why even try? All that lovely limiting belief thinking was not good. Um, but I'm glad I've done that work to get past that. So I want to ask you, are all the books you currently read now, are they strictly personal development? Um, and if they are, then what are the subcategories like under that? Because I'm sure that runs the gamut in certain types of stuff. So what kind of books are you reading?
Yeah, for me, I define personal development as a book that you can read and implement something from, and it can get you closer to where you want to be in life. So it
Okay.
is kind of a general definition. Yeah, I'm not reading much fiction, like fantasy, anything like that. I'm not reading any historical nonfiction or biographies, by and about people that aren't in the world of business in some way, shape, or form.
Okay.
So I think most of the books that I'm reading right now, they fall under maybe sort of the subcategory of business. I do read
Okay.
a lot of personal finance, philosophy, psychology, books on health, fitness, and nutrition. I read books on mindset and happiness. So that's most of what I'm reading today. And there probably will be a time later in life where I kind of switch things up and I start reading a lot of the traditional fiction series, things like Lord of the Rings and Harry
Right.
Potter and Game of Thrones. But I'm just not there yet. I think I think at this stage in my life, I'm energized and motivated around the world of business. And so I'm trying to keep my head in that space.
Yeah. That's kind of the same thought process that I have. Like I did read an autobiography for somebody that came on my podcast. Her story was incredible. She lived in St. Louis, so it, there was ties to that cuz that's where I live. Um but right now I'm just like a sponge and wanting to learn everything about whether it's mental health, spirituality, personal development, all that stuff. And while I'm wanting to learn so much, like you said, like I can do the other books when I get older, but right now I'm like in my momentum phase that I just want to keep just learning everything I can.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. One of the things that I've found myself saying a little bit recently is that so many of us think that life is harder than it really has to be. And we think the problems that we're dealing with are unique to us. But the fact of the matter is that about 100 billion people have lived before us. Millions of them have written books, and thousands of those books detail ways to overcome the same problem that you're facing today. So
Yeah.
it's like for a few dollars, $20 and a few hours of your time, you can overcome that problem or you could develop that skill set. And so that's exactly how I'm thinking about these books too, is like they condense decades of
Mm,
wisdom and lived experience into days of reading. There's no better learning opportunity than that. We don't I mean, we talked about learning through our own failure, and I think that's important, but learning from the failures of other people is a lot safer, and you don't have to go through all the chaos yourself. You can go through it from the comfort of your own home or your bed or whatever, and you can overcome all those same problems in your own life.
yeah. There's a couple of points I want to talk about of what you said in terms of like other people and going through their stuff and they've lived it and they've been through the failures and stuff like that. That's probably been one of the most reassuring things for me when reading books or just having guests on my podcast because I felt so alone in this situation when like literally you said millions of people probably go through the same thing or entrepreneurs or whatever. I'm not the first one and it's very very like relieving. Not that I want you to go through the same pain as me, but to know that you did and you came out on the other side, I'm like, okay, Melissa, you are actually right on trajectory of like where you think you should be. You're doing all the things that you should be. Not saying I'm doing it perfect. What I'm trying to say is like, I lost my train of thought for a second. Um, I don't even know what
Well,
I was
I
going to say.
agree. I agree 1,000%. Yeah. So I'm right there with you. I think that it is comforting. So sometimes people say comparison is the thief of joy, but I think that comparison can create joy when you compare your journey to somebody else because you can you could say, "Oh, you know what? My situation's not that bad." You can gain perspective and you
Mm-hmm.
can cultivate like a sense of gratitude by realizing that other people have had it worse
Yep.
and they overcame that same problem that you're currently facing. And you could do it faster because you're not testing everything out yourself. You're just copying what they did to become successful.
Yeah. And that was one of the biggest reasons of like my podcast and my healing journey, which was incongruent with my podcast, is I got to hear all these people's stories. And I was like, oh my God, I did not just lose my child when he was 6 years old. That's really damn hard. Like, how can I implement some of the grief that she's went to and apply it to my situation or what have you? Um, so you're very right about that. There was something else I wanted to say, but I don't remember what it was. Um, whatever. That's okay. I wanna ask you, um, we're gonna see how hard I'm gonna make this question for you. What okay, give me your top 5 favorite books just in general, no reason why. Well, you can have the reason why, but it doesn't have to be a certain topic.
Sure. The 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss, because that book not only did it help me build a sort of a distributed remote business where I'm only focused on things that I enjoy and I automate, delegate, and eliminate the rest,
Mm,
but it also introduced me to the world of international travel. And I've spent time in 25 different countries so far, sometimes for up to a few months at a time. And if I didn't have book thinkers, maybe I would have travel thinkers or something. I get so much out of international travel. So that's one
right.
of my favorite books. I mentioned $100 million offers
Yep.
earlier. So that was Alex's book before Leads. And that book added 6 figures of additional revenue to my business within a few months of reading it. And for a small business, that is massive. But I
Right.
read and implemented the book. In fact, I read and implemented only part of the book, and that's how much of an impact it had. So when you think about return on investment, if there's somebody that's still listening or watching today and they're not convinced yet, I literally invested $20 in this book in a few hours of my time, and I made over $100,000 from it in a few
Yeah.
months. Like
Yeah.
that's actually what can happen. So that's book number two. I
Alex
mentioned the
owes you some money. Alex owes you some
Yeah,
money
he
for that
does.
ad spot.
Yeah, and you know what? He uses me in his presentations. So
Mm,
I'll show you this since we're talking about it.
that's
I've
cool.
had so many people send me this slide, but this is from one of his YouTube video presentations recently, and it's a book thinker's
Oh, yes.
review, which is just so funny.
That's
But
awesome.
yeah, Alex owes me a little bit. Uh Book number 3 that I'll recommend is The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy.
Okay.
It says that small steps in the right direction, repeated for a very long period of time, will lead to disproportionately positive outcomes. So think about, well, when I think about my journey posting on social media, when I first started, I was posting for a handful of people.
Hmm.
I'm still posting today, but now posts get seen by tens of thousands of people. And
Yep.
so it's the same activity, but it's a different result. And I've been consistently posting for 5 or 6 years now. So that's the result of it. And that happens in business and health and happiness. I love the idea of the compound effect.
Yeah.
Book number 4, I have so many favorite books. Book number 4, I really loved the Steve Jobs biography by Walter Isaacson.
Okay.
I mean, when you're a business owner, there's this romantic idea of two guys starting Apple in a garage, right?
Hmm.
Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, and now it's $1 trillion company. But it started in a garage by two kids who didn't know what they were doing. And I loved reading that story, digesting it, understanding it, because it gives you inspiration. It shows you what other people have done with even less
Mm,
and what they've been able to create. And I think that's so magical. So yeah,
yeah.
I love that.
I haven't read any of those damn ones. Alex's book, I want to read. I had read his little sample thing on Amazon of the $100 or 100 million. Is it offers he has right now? Yes. And I'm like, oh crap. I really need to like go back and read his first book like yesterday. Um, I've heard of 4 Hour Work Week. Once again, you hear, but you don't take action, you don't read them. Um, Compound Effect, I might have heard, and Steve Jobs, well, everybody's heard of him. So I don't know why I feel bad that I haven't read them, but I'll get there.
You will get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is everybody can take it at their own pace. I mean, the fact that you're reading and implementing personal development books in the first place separates you from 98% of people, because I mean, I was almost one of them. Most people don't read after they graduate school,
Yeah.
which is sad.
I don't think I started reading this much until I started my podcast. I know I didn't, but then I started having authors on my podcast and I'm like, okay, I might need to know what the hell they're talking about. I just had Dr. Bradley Nelson from the Emotion Code on my podcast. I had previously interviewed him for a summit, but then as soon he like blew my mind and I'm like, I have to go read his book because it's life-changing. It can literally heal you from ailments and all this other stuff. Um, so I guess the message is like read some books.
Yeah, the right book at the right time can change your life.
Yeah. I saw this question on Google and I just want to know your thoughts on it. Is reading a skill or a habit?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
I think it's a skill that can be developed into a habit. It is a skill because I'll say this. My ability to read effectively, take great notes, and implement information is 1,000 times more effective today than it was when I first started, which means that I've improved over time. And I think that's probably the definition of a skill. I think that it is a skill that should be a habit. So when you think of Atomic Habits
Yep.
or a book like that, I love giving the following example. So if you read for 15 minutes in the morning and
Hmm.
15 minutes in the evening, that's 30 minutes a day. For somebody who's first starting out, that's about 20 pages. If you can do that 5 days a week, so Monday through Friday, that's 100 pages a week. That's a book every 2.5 weeks. A lot of these books are only 200 pages nowadays.
Right.
So you can read 26 books over the next 12 months by reading for 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the evening. And if you could do that consistently, that's a habit. And the skill itself will improve over time. So you'll probably end up reading more and reading faster because through repetition, you'll improve. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's such a beautiful thing to think about. And I don't recommend I don't recommend trying to find time to read. I recommend replacing something like
Yep.
social media in the morning and Netflix in the evening with reading a great book. And I think that's where a lot of the magic happens.
See, that was a limiting belief that I held for a long time of like, I don't have time. And I did exactly what you just did. Instead of finishing the episode of whatever the hell I was watching, now go in my bedroom and read. And now a lot of times I know it's going to help me. It's going to help me like with my coaching business because I want to help my clients, or if it's my own business, like whatever it has to do with, I know it's going to help me. So it's almost like my permission, but it's also my permission to slow down. Like, Melissa, literally, this is your homework. You have to go read this book because you want to help a client, or you need to go do it to figure out this for your business. Um, because before that was not my mindset. It was like, if I wasn't physically like doing something, then I was wasting my time reading, which is insane to think about.
Yeah, I think it's in the 7 habits of highly effective people. Habit number 7 is sharpen the saw. And the
Mm.
example is if you were given 6 hours to saw down a tree, you should spend the first 4 sharpening your saw, and then it will only take you 2 hours of effort to cut down the tree rather than using a dull blade and spending all 6 hours working vigorously only to
Yeah.
never get the tree cut down. So yeah, reading is like sharpening the saw. It's improving it's working on your life instead of working in your life, which is a really important differentiation in
Yep.
my opinion.
Yeah. That's so true. When you were talking earlier, I wanted to ask you this. Do you feel your books have inspired you more or given you permission? And what I mean by that, a lot of times I need permission to be like, if I feel like the thing I'm doing isn't right, but then the second that like Alex Harmozy said he did this exact same thing, and I'm like, thank you, Jesus. This is my permission to just be okay with what I'm doing right now. Um, what what do you feel like? Do you feel like inspiration, permission, both?
I think it's probably both.
Yeah.
Oftentimes when we hear somebody else tell us that something is okay, I think it is both. Because I was given permission by Tim Ferriss to create a reality that's uniquely fulfilling to me, right? He gave me that language. He gave me permission. He said, you can escape the 9 to 5 and build the life of your dreams. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go do that, right? And I only did that after he gave me permission.
Yeah.
I was also inspired to do it because I realized how possible it was because he detailed his own experience. So yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of both. What about you?
I I would say the exact same thing for sure. Um, you read these people that have done it and have overcame these things, and they're kind of like they're out of the trenches, and like we might be a little bit in the trenches, and you're like, yes, like okay, you've been here, cool, I'm here. Oh, but I can also have that life. Like I want to do that, and that's super inspiring. So I definitely feel like it's both. Yeah.
Yeah, they really can change your life.
I know. I know. Now I like want to go and are there any do you have a list, an ongoing list of books that you got to read next?
I do. I mean, because Book Thinkers as an agency still does paid book reviews. I do
Yeah.
have quite a few books that are always in the queue, which is great. And I'm so
Yeah.
grateful for that. I'm not always choosing a book to solve my problems or develop my skills, right?
Hmm.
I'm reading a book for my community and giving my perspective on it, but I love that too. You know what?
Yeah.
I'm paid to read books, and I built a business around something that I developed a passion for. And so how could I ever express anything other than gratitude? So, but yeah, I've got a lot of I've got a lot of books in the queue.
Yeah. That's awesome. And it's cool because a book that you are paid to review might literally change your mind on how to, I don't know, make belts or something. And you're like, I want to make a belt. You just don't know what could happen.
Yeah, it's very true. I have a fun metaphor with belts. So I talk about in my book the concept of a book belt. So you
Okay.
know how a construction worker has a tool belt, and if
Yeah.
they see a nail, they could pull out the hammer, or if they see a screw, they could pull out a screwdriver. I think about books that way too, because sometimes you're reading books that you can't necessarily apply today, but you always have them in your book belt. And
Mm,
so maybe you read a book on negotiation, but you don't have a situation where you necessarily need to negotiate. That's okay. You're developing the skill, you're tucking that book away in your book belt, and maybe one day you're going to buy a new car and you need to break out those notes and review them really quick and apply your new negotiation skills. You know, that tool. These
yep.
books are tools to that situation. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a
because
great
you said belt, I
analogy.
thought about it.
I love that analogy. That is good. Well, Nick, do you have anything else that you would like to add? Before we go, I'm definitely gonna have you tell people where they can find all of your stuff at, but do you have any last words?
Sure, I'll say one more thing. I think that reading, it can be a solo sport, meaning you can participate in it by yourself, but I think it's better as a team sport. I think if you can read a book with your best friends, your most motivated friends, an accountability coach, a coach, then you can get more out of the book because you can talk about things from somebody else's perspective, and that will only help you retain and implement more from the books you're reading. So, yeah, I would say to everybody, grab a copy of Rise of the Reader.
Yeah.
And if you are looking to start an accountability group with your friends, maybe consider buying a few copies for them, giving them a
Mm,
copy and saying, hey, let's read a chapter a week together. Let's talk about this on the weekends. Let's try to shift more of our conversations from football or gossip into, constructive, useful stuff, which I think there's a space, there's some space that can be filled with conversation about improving your lives. And if we are the average of the 5 people that we spend the most time with, why not improve that average as you're kind of taking off? Because personal development can be a lonely sport.
mm,
You can be the
yes.
most motivated person that you're around.
Yep.
And so why not improve that average and read a good book together?
Yeah, I love that. And congratulations on your book launch. I'm sure it's been a lot of work in the process and we're almost to D-Day, day 1 or day 0, whatever it is.
It's coming
One
soon, November 1st.
Yes, that is so exciting. Well, Nick, I ask all of my guests this. What does the bright side of life mean to you?
I do believe that anything in your reality can be viewed as positive. I really do. There's a concept in Stoicism called amor fati, which is the love of one's fate. And Stoicism as an actionable philosophy teaches us that we only control a certain number of variables, the rest we can't control. So why ever let those upset you? A natural disaster, something happening in your business, a worldwide pandemic. Not only should we not let those emotionally affect us, but we should almost view them as the bright side. We should view them as something that's positive by nature. And you get more out of life that way when you're always looking for an opportunity to look at the bright side of things. So, yeah, I believe life is beautiful. I don't believe it has to be so hard. I believe there's a book to solve every problem, and that's what the bright side is all about.
Oh, I love that. That's like mic drop. I love it.
I'll drop
Thank
it.
you. Yeah. Thank you so much, Nick. This was wonderful and you are awesome. And congratulations on all your success. I just love everything that you guys are doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanna